Hi, and welcome back to Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context-driven. I'm your host, John Strazicic, and we'll be continuing on here in our study through Romans 11. And if you have your Bibles, go ahead and open them up to Romans chapter 11, and we'll be looking here today, most likely just at verses 11 to 15. Okay, so we'll be continuing on here with Dr. Wagner, since he's on a roll here. In response to the crucial question, has God rejected his inheritance? Paul has argued vigorously that despite Israel's rejection of the gospel, God remains faithful to his chosen people. That was, he's talking there about Romans 11, 1-2. God's enduring commitment to Israel is proven by the fact that at the present time, God is reserving for himself a remnant of Israel, one of whom, but by no means the only one, is Paul himself. The rest of Israel, however, God has made insensible. That means he's hardened them, just as the scripture testifies. And that was found out last time there in 11, 7-10. Paul's analysis of the situation naturally gives rise to a further query concerning the fate of those who have been divinely anathematized. Do Paul's statements in Romans 11, 1-10 imply that the remnant has effectively become Israel, or does there remain a future for the rest as well? In Romans 11:11a, the apostle resumes the athletic metaphor introduced in 9:30 and reprised as recently as 11:7. I say then, they haven't stumbled so as to fall, have they? That is Romans 11:11. Having run up against the stone of stumbling, the rest of Israel has failed to reach the telos, that is the end of their race righteousness, but has this misstep knocked them out of the contest altogether. The answer Paul gives to the question is crucial for understanding the entire argument in Romans 9-11. Boy, I say. Once again, Israel's scriptures ground Paul's adamant denial that God has forsaken the people he called to be his own. Although Paul does not quote scripture explicitly at this point in his argument, his explanation of God's plan for Israel has been hammered out in conversation with passages cited previously in Romans, particularly Deuteronomy 32 and Isaiah 65. These texts provide the conceptual, that's very true, and temporal framework for Paul's sweeping account of God's design to redeem Israel and with them the entire cosmos. This plan captured succinctly in verses 11b-12, though through their misstep, salvation comes to the Gentiles in order to provoke Israel to jealousy. And if their misstep brings wealth for the cosmos and their defeat brings wealth for the Gentiles, how much more will their fullness? Paul will spend the rest of the chapter unpacking the full import of these lines. But already the contributions of Deuteronomy 32 and Isaiah 65 to his conception of the divine economy is evident. Now, these, what Dr. Wagner is saying here is very important, and you just may want to, stop this at the present time and reread this for yourself. Okay, then coming here then to this particular text, we will offer up our translation as we typically do. And originally what I was going to do here, I was going to try to bite off a little bit too much. I was going to try to go from Romans 11:11 all the way down here to verse 24. But as I started getting into the text, this is the unit. The unit definitely goes from 11:11 to 24, and then point A, underneath this heading then is just going to be from what is in red, that is from 11:11 to 15. And then basically he basically then gives a teaching based upon what he was what he states here in verses 11 to 15 in a somewhat parabolic or some type of allegorical statement that he makes here concerning the olive tree and its branches. And that all incorporates here from verse 16 all the way down to 24. And so these two texts here do belong together, but due to time constraints, and then just typically dealing with the literary genre of the two are quite different, but they go hand in glove together. So we have Paul's teaching here, his didactic version here in 11 to 15, and then we have his didactic teaching by means of metaphor or some type of presentation, maybe such as an allegory. And so that's kind of how I would look at this, but definitely the overall unit stretches from 11:11 all the way down to 24. Okay, then we'll begin here with our translation here, 11:11, with lego un. Therefore I say, they have not stumbled in order that they might fall, me genoita, may it never be, but by their transgression salvation, and we have to supply, has come to the Gentiles in order to provoke them to jealousy. Now, if their transgression is the riches of the world, and their defeat is the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? But I tell you, that is to the Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle of the Gentiles, or we can say to the degree that therefore I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify my ministry. If somehow I may provoke my flesh, basically what it means, my countrymen, and save certain of them. For if they're literally apabole, they're casting away, but we could just say, just a lot of translations are just going to say, for if their rejection or their removal is the reconciliation of the world, what is the acceptance? Or we have to kind of supply out tone here. What is their acceptance but life from the dead? And then we're going to stop it right there here, because once we get here to verse 16, then this is going to be the introductory sentence here that leads us on into Paul's, basically his allegorical teaching of the olive tree that explains, just exactly what he brought to light here in verses 11 to 15. Okay, then coming then to this slide, this was a difficult task here to provide a structural analysis just for verses 11 to 15. And it took a lot of meditation. On my part. This wasn't easy for me to develop this. But just getting a little bigger picture here of where we're at in chapter 11. We're at point 3, and point 1 was basically what we saw in chapter 9, verses 6 to 29. The second point, we could say, it was basically chapter 10 plus a couple prior verses, 30 to 33, from the previous chapter of 9. And now that we're on the third point, and that's 11:1 to 32. And then the chapter is going to end with the peroratio in verses 33 to to 36. And that's going to provide the where Paul wraps it all up. But all the meat is sandwiched in between 9:1 to 5 and 11:33 to 36, and that takes up these 3 points. And we are on the third point here in chapter 11, where it all comes together. And last week we looked at point A here. God has not wholly rejected his people, God's gracious election of a remnant, and we saw that in verses 1 to 10. And so now we're on point B. Israel's misstep and acceptance grants salvation and eschatological life to all with allegory. So that's going to take up all of 11 to 24, and that is the unit. The unit is verses 11 to 24. And that comes in 2 parts here. If we look here at our text for today, Israel's misstep and acceptance grants missional salvation and eschatological life to all, 11 to 15. That's point 1. And then point 2 is Paul's allegorical illustration of the olive tree and the Gentiles' relationship to Israel. So this basically goes over our Hebrew roots, no pun intended. But that pretty much sums up, Paul's illustration here of the olive tree and the Gentiles' relationship to Israel. It's all about our Jewish roots. But that's going to be covered next time, because we just today we have all of this material here in 11 to 15, and so we have I have this underneath Roman numeral 1 and 2 here. The material in 11 to 15 is going to be divided from verse 11 is all by itself, and then point 2 here that takes us from 12 to 15. These are Paul's restatements of Israel's misstep and future fullness and its missional, salvific, eschatological aim. And that takes up all of 12 to 15. So we're going to have these two units here. 11 to 15 are going to divide here. 11 itself takes up Paul's rhetorical question and answer concerning Israel's misstep. Okay, and so I have this here underneath alpha beta, rhetorical question and answer. That's 11a, and that basically takes up lego un me eptaison hina pesosin me genoita. Therefore I say, they have not stumbled in order that they might fall, have they? Me genoita, may it never be. And then he goes on, but by their transgression, soteria has come to the Gentiles, and that's eista parazelosai autus, in order to provoke them to jealousy. And so that there is, so verse 11 divides itself. We have the rhetorical question and answer, 11a. And then, then we have here in 11b, Israel's current misstep, contrastively, and that's the controlling word here, Allah, contrastively grants missional salvation to the Gentiles. So we have the means of Israel's misstep, that's their transgression, 11ba, Israel's misstep contrastively grants the salvific mission to the Gentiles. That's 11b beta. And then the purpose of the Gentile salvation is to missionally provoke Israel to jealousy. That's 11b gamma. And that takes up these points right here, Roman numeral 1, 2, and 3. And then this brings us down here to Roman numeral number 2 here and this is the restatements, Paul's restatements. So this takes up, this Bildungs motif here, where Paul's, building up a little bit at a time to kind of reach a fuller statement. So he keeps giving these restatements that build upon themselves. So this is why we call it a Bildungs motif. It's this, it's the process of building up the motif through these, recasted, or how Paul makes these restatements here, concerning this rhetorical question that was denied. Did Israel stumble that they may fall? And so he denies that answer. They haven't fallen completely flat, never to get up, but they have definitely taken a serious stumble, and they are not granted salvation. That is until they believe and they become the remnant according to that is left according to grace that we saw last time. But it's this really the 12 to 15 is really the meat here, where of this passage where Paul's building up these motifs, and he in 12, Paul has, it's Paul's initial Calva-Omer argument, minore ad meus argument of Israel's fullness. So this is a Calva-Omer argument. That means from light to heavy, or minore ad menus, from the minor premise to the major premise of the argument, and that's going to be taken up here in all of verse 12. And so we have, Paul presents two protases. We have the first minor premise and the second minor premise, and then we have the apodosis, the vachomer part, or the ad meus, or the major premise, comes in here in verse 12c. So this was, if their transgression is the riches of the world, and their defeat, the riches of the Gentile, how much more their fullness, passo malon ta pleroma auton. So this is this Calva-Omer argument from light to heavy, or it's the a fortiori argument, the argument from the greater premise, and so this is presented, and as we said, he has two protases statements, the first minor premise, second minor premise, and then he builds up the motif here then to build up to our apodosis, and then the argument from the major premise here, concerning how much more their fullness. So it's saying that if if Israel's trespass brought about riches of the world, and Israel's defeat brought about the riches of the Gentiles, well, how much more than their fullness? So this first Paul's initial Calva-Omer argument, then he's going back. You got to remember, this all has everything to do with 11a. Did they stumble in order that they may fall? So Paul here is building up this Bildungs motif. He's building up this idea here that there's more to Israel, that God hasn't finished. Even though the nation's in rebellion for the most part, and there's just a small small minority of them being saved, he's still keeping the people alive, because they are keeping alive a generation that eventually will come, in which that whole generation is going to be saved in the eschatological era, when the times of the Gentiles are complete. Now, that's how I'm understanding this. And we'll say that more here, but their fullness is going to refer definitely, however you're going to interpret this, when the times of the Gentiles becomes complete, and then when Messiah returns and he comes out of Zion, we'll see this in verses 25 following, and this answers then remember, like I was telling you, Israel, if chapter 8 presented such glorious material, nothing can separate us from the love of God that's in Christ Jesus. And they're going, wow, well, if that's true, well, then what happened to Israel? I mean, if God loved Israel so much, I mean, if he loves the Gentiles, then of course, and he loves the Israel. So what happened to them? So Paul's explaining himself. This is what he's got. He's explaining this all. It's all being fleshed out right here in front of us. And our text here today is very important. You're beginning to see, the flesh come on the bones here in this part, but he will breathe life into those bones when he gets to verse 25. But at least here you can start to see some rattling of the bones and a little bit of flesh being put on them, but no breath gets put into them until verse 25. But it's that represents life from the dead. For sure. And then, this is point alpha that we're looking at, Paul's initial Calva-Oma argument. Then Paul gives his own restatement to the Gentiles concerning his own ministry in Israel. And it's kind of somewhat, it's kind of like a parenthesis, but when you start looking at this parenthesis, it's really dealing, with exactly, Paul didn't really take us off topic. So some scholars use parentheses, but he's still on topic here. And so Paul's address to the Gentiles, it comes in 13a, and that's point 1, and then point 2 here in verses 13 to 14. This is Paul's own restatement to the Gentiles concerning his ministry and Israel. And then we have 13b to 14 is Roman numeral 2, Paul's statement of his Gentile apostleship and his outreach to Israel. So we have the conditions of degree, to the degree that I am an apostle, that's alpha. And then B with the apodosis, Paul glorifies his ministry, and then he has these conditions that come in these protases, these conditions of the possibility of reaching his fellow countrymen, and this comes here in verse 14. If somehow I may provoke my flesh, basically that means my countrymen, to jealousy, and I might save certain of them. That's verse 14. So, Paul's, is glorifying his ministry, and there's he's glorifying his Gentile ministry. How? Because by reaching the Gentiles, remember that the Gentiles' own salvation was to provoke Israel itself, that, God's calling this no nation to be God's, his very own. So that's to provoke, Israel back to jealousy. That's going back to the principle there of, back to Deuteronomy 32, verse 21, and some of Isaiah 65, 1 and 2, as Ross was telling us, and as Bell tells us. And so this is really underlining, everything that came out of those verses back there in the previous, 10:21, 20 and 21, those are all these verses that Paul is theologizing on now here, that it's, Israel's misstep is bringing, salvation to the Gentiles. That's all just, he's unpacking the, what that meant in Deuteronomy 32:21 and this Isaiah. So he's this is all of this, Bildung's motif, this building up of the motif here of this particular theology of what God's doing with Israel at the present time. And no, he has not, Israel did not stumble so as to fall to never rise. So Paul's looking at his Gentile apostleship as a means by which, to reach, if possible, provoking them to jealousy and saving some of them. That is the Israelite people, through his very own, apostleship to the Gentiles. And then he finally ends in a final basis statement here, point gamma, in verse 15, which is very, very important, which caps off everything that he wanted to say in another Calva Omer argument. So you got to see, he started up here in verse 12 with the Calva Omer argument, and then he goes into his own argument, his own restatement of it from his own apostleship, that poses a condition and protases of his own ministry. And then he comes back with the final basis statement, and it is a basis statement here, and it is a Calva Omer argument, from lesser to greater in verse 15. For if their apabole, their casting away, or would you say their removal, is the reconciliation of the world, what is their acceptance except life from the dead? So there you go. There you have your argument from lesser to greater. If their removal brought about, the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? So this stumbled mass of Israel is going to get back on its feet one day, and it's going to be, they are going to be accepted in the, at the very end of Gentile history, and we will view that as at the very end of the tribulation, when Christ comes back. That's when all Israel will be saved. They'll look on him whom they pierced, and they'll understand, wow, we blew it. So they will be saved during the millennium. That's how I'm calling it here. But this gives us here this is a walkthrough. So if you understood, the points that I just went through here, and you go back and re-look at this, all of this works out, here in verse 15, and this structure analysis works here for this text, and these points are real, and this did not come about easy, and you should study this. Especially if you are a teacher, and you should look at this. You can put your own titles to it, but these points you can just put it in your own vernacular. You're free to use all this stuff, of course, in any form it comes in. Remember, the gospel is free. Okay, then coming here then for a little bit of exegesis and diagrammatical analysis all wrapped up together. We're going to look here at verse 11, and diagrammatically we'll look here at un. We have here this this post-positive conjunction of inference, un, therefore, I say, and then Paul then opens up here into his own quoted speech here, and that's why we would put this on stilts, and so this is basically functioning as an introductory speech quotation. of himself here. And it's put in a rhetorical question. May, and so may is on stilts as well here because it expects the answer no, and it's the interrogative use of may, and so the subject is already contained here within the verb itself. Which we have eptaison here, which is the aorist form, third person plural. They have not stumbled, and then we have this hina clause here, in order that they may fall. They have not stumbled in order that they may fall, have they? And the answer, it comes here, meganoita, and it's then coupled here with an adversative sentence that is going to then be a rejoinder to our meganoita here. The answer is an emphatic no, but okay, and then we say, and then we have to then we say, by their transgression salvation, and we have to provide the elliptical verb that was omitted, and we'll put it in with gigonin, has come about to the Gentiles. So we have the indirect object here, to the Gentiles, and then we have this purpose statement here, with this this infinitive of purpose, eista, and then we have parazelosi autus, in order to provoke them to jealousy. And so this is how you would pretty much, look at this diagrammatically and explain verse 11. Okay, then coming here, then we are going to then look here at the next point here in verses 12 to 15, and we have here Paul's first, his Cal V'omer argument here that he's going to develop. So Cal is just the light, and then V'omer is the heavy. Then or this is the a minore ad meius here, from light to heavy, from light premises to the heavy premise, which is a affertory argument from the greater. And so it starts here when we look at the at the main clause. De here is, I'm going to translate this now, not by but here. It's going to be now. It's just going to continue the narrative here. Now, and we're going to start down here with this subordinate clause. Now, if their parapatoma, if their transgression, or literally their falling away, is the riches of the world, and this is two if clauses, and if their defeat is the riches of the Gentiles, right? And then Malan Paso, how much more their fullness. So then this here becomes the argument from the greater, how much more their fullness. But in diagrammatical analysis, the condition is always subordinate to the main clause, their fullness. And so this is how we would understand it. But looking down here, if you're reading the sentence, if their transgression is the riches of the world, and their loss or their defeat the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness. So this is definitely incipiently giving you a hint that they haven't stumbled so as to fall. Their fullness, there's something is about to happen to this stumbling mass of Israel. At some point in time, they're going to get back on their feet. That's true, but it's not until the times of the Gentiles are complete, as we will find out. Okay, then coming here to verses 13 and 14. I do have to give credit here to Randy Leedy in some correspondence that I have communicated with him to understand exactly how to diagram this particular sentence here. If you're wondering, I get my information, from Randy Leedy, Accordance has their own, set of grammatical analysis that is, kind of a multi-edited form by several different individuals. And we really don't know who did what, but anyhow, it was teamwork. And then William Ramey is another excellent scholar as well. Between just myself and these particular resources, I try to make sense of this, and sometimes it's just too difficult. And sometimes you got to reach out and ask, some other scholars about some of this material, exactly how to understand it. And especially with a post down here, Dr. Leedy had, basically advised me to look at it this way here, and which I have incorporated. And I do want to give thanks to Dr. Leedy for, and he's an excellent diagrammaticalist, and so is Ramey. I mean, these are top-notch people, folks. You should own their works, and they are available online. Just type in Randy Leedy or William Ramey, and you will find their works, and avail yourself to their analyses. I certainly do. And as you know, if you've been working at all with diagrammatical analysis, it's not easy stuff. You're constantly looking at different grammars, I look here and I consult John Harvey in the Exegetical Guide to the Greek New Testament, and I look at Stanley Porter's his handbook on the Greek text of Romans in the Baylor series. So these texts are invaluable to us as Greek exegetes, and no one puts them all together. You got to kind of use all your resources, put it together yourself, make sense of it, and between all these resources and the commentaries, to whatever degree they help, you're going to be able to get the full understanding here. So the way that verses 13 to 14, this is just one big long sentence, and it begins here. Now I speak to you Gentiles. So this is the way Paul here in his diatribe, and then he's speaking to his interlocutors here, which is to you Gentiles. These are the Roman Gentiles of the Church of Rome. Now I speak to you. So he's specifically addressing them here in 13a. Okay. And then the way that the main clause here, the main clause is up here, I glorify my ministry. And then we have this, we have two subordinate, clauses here. Both, what the first one here, F Hassan here. This is basically going to then function. This F Hassan is where, this is where Randy Leedy helped me to put this together. It's basically functioning as a conjunction here, not so much as a prepositional phrase, and that's why I put it this way. And you will see that Ramey is trying to go that way, and he uses dotted lines. I'm using a solid line here, okay, and this is what Randy Leedy advised me to do, just with my own personal correspondence with this excellent, Greek grammarian. Way beyond my expertise, that's for sure. And so we would basically translate this. Now I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I glorify my ministry. So this then is the apodosis, and then coming down here is going to be the protasis, if possible, and then it's going to be bifurcated here into these two clauses. If somehow I may, and I'm going to look at these not as not as future tenses, but this is just going to be aorist. These are going to be aorist subjunctives because of the a here. If somehow I may provoke my flesh, that is my countrymen, to jealousy, and I might save certain of them. So you can see that Paul's ministry, to the Gentiles. Remember, God's using the Gentiles themselves to provoke Israel to jealousy. So if Paul's the apostle to the Gentiles, then his whole ministry then is in effect is building up so that that they are going to then provoke the Jewish people to jealousy themselves. And so Paul's by rubbing by scratching the back of the Gentiles, he's then scratching the itch of his own flesh, so to speak, and which is his own countrymen. Okay, and so then so this is still it may be some a type of parenthetical statement, but it's still exactly on target of what he's talking about here, about provoking his fellow countrymen to jealousy that they may be saved. Okay, and so it's still on topic here, even though both verses 13 and 14 may be somewhat parenthetical in nature, but our main clause, the apodosis here, is I might and we do have men here, but therefore I speak in as to the degree that, or in as much as I am an apostle of the Gentiles, I glorify my ministry, if somehow I may provoke my flesh to jealousy, and I may save certain of them. Okay, that's the diagrammatical analysis for this text. Okay, then that brings us then to verse 15, where Paul gives his final bases of restatement, gar. So he's going to then wrap this up with a final Calva Omer argument, a fortiori argument, or a minore ad majus here, from a lesser premise to a greater premise, and this all then, remember, you start this off here, with the minor premises, then going to the major premise, but diagrammatically they are subordinate. The if clauses are subordinate to the main clause, which is the protasis, which is the argument from the greater. So we would look at this for, okay, here for if looking at the first or at the premise here, for if their I guess their casting away or their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what is their acceptance but life from the dead? Okay, so this here is how we are then to diagrammatically analyze this particular text. This here is the protasis. This is the apodosis in question form, and then the answer then comes here in this a may clause here, except life from the dead. So if Israel's casting away for the moment is the reconciliation of the world, that means that salvation goes to the Gentiles. What will their acceptance be but life from the dead? So this means that when Israel stops stumbling and believes in their Messiah, then all Israel will be saved. And at that moment, then if they're casting away produce the reconciliation of the world, well, then what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? So this is then the resurrection, the second coming. At the second coming, boom, this is where when the resurrection happens, and we all get a glorified body, and hey, hot dog, it's life from the dead. Okay, then we're just going to end off with another quote, since Wagner has the swag, and he's got the swagger here. We might as well, when you got something good going, you might as well just run that horse. Okay. As we have seen, Paul interprets Deuteronomy 32:21 in light of the passage he quotes alongside it, Isaiah 65:1. It is by means of this latter text that Paul identifies God's provoking Israel to jealousy with his astonishing decision graciously to call the Gentiles into his people by extending to them the salvation promised to Israel. Yet for Paul, the drama does not end here. Well, you can say that. He speaks not only of Israel's misstep and loss, but also of their fullness, their pleroma. This conception too coheres to the plot line of Israel's story disclosed in Moses' song. That is the Ha'azinu, that back there in Deuteronomy chapter 32. As I argued earlier, Paul's interpretation of Deuteronomy 32:21 hinges on its context in the larger ballad of God and Israel sung by Moses in Deuteronomy chapter 32. There, Yahweh's abandonment of Israel is only temporary. Having provoked his people to jealousy, Israel's God once again arises to rescue them by defeating their enemies, Deuteronomy 32 to 42. As Paul understands it, the jealous rage into which God seeks to drive Israel by embracing Gentiles will be what eventually leads to the full reconciliation of their strange relationship. And ultimately to the renewal of all creation. To continue the athletic metaphor, the sight of the Gentiles crossing the finish line will be what inspires Israel to regain their feet and run with renewed zeal toward the goal, the righteousness of God revealed in Christ. Wagner, you get an A. Very excellent. What a great scholar. You guys, you'd be really benefited to look to this particular gentleman here in his work here on the book of Romans. Okay, this has been another session of Biblical Theology, Exegesis, and Hermeneutics, where meaning is always context driven. What I mean, a text, words only have meaning within the context that they're placed. And so this is, if you only want to get down to exegesis and hermeneutics, well, learn this phrase where meaning is always context driven. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And we will catch you back here next time.